What's going on, fellow gamers? This is Days and
Peggy 16.
Dark Souls 3. Man, I can always do some more Souls. Whoever's saying it's too early for Dark Souls 3, man, I do not know what the hell you're thinking. Anyway, let's get to the point. So quite a few people got a look at Dark Souls 3's demo during a private presentation held by Miyazaki himself at E3. And here's everything I've collected from different sources, which will all be linked in the description. Meaning that I do not claim to have discovered all of this on my own, but rather just summarizing everything into one brief video, which includes the info we got from E3, and my own speculation, which you're watching right now. First of all, I'd like to talk about a few things I've noticed in the trailer, starting with the music. The music is reminiscent of that of Dark Souls. I can already tell that this is a Miyazaki game just by listening to the music in the trailer. I don't even need to look at the trailer. By the music, I can tell that this is a Miyazaki game. I don't know about you guys, but I'm the type to feel slight sadness / depression after every ending of things like movies, series shows, or games. Only when they're good enough to get me hooked though. What I'm trying to say is that Souls games have taught me how to look forward to credits, for once. In this case, the ending music of every Souls game has been something very intriguing to me. Music that instills a lingering feeling of nostalgia every time I listen to it. So naturally I'm excited for every credits song at the end of every Souls game, which proved to be musical masterpieces, and specifically every Miyazaki game. Major questions are rising ever since the trailer came out. Like, is this a sequel or a prequel to Dark Souls 1 or Dark Souls 2? Well, I've briefly put together all the information we've got from E3 to try to determine the answer of this question. Firstly, we've got a blunt reference to Dark Souls 1 in the trailer, which is the quote, "Now only embers remain." This is obviously a Dark Souls 1 reference, and let me explain how come, although it doesn't really need any explanation. During the Dark Souls 3 demo, Miyazaki kept referring to the fading sun. That's another Dark Souls 1 reference. I believe the sun was also fading in Dark Souls 1 as the Age of Fire was on the brink of its end, but we're still not sure of the situation in Dark Souls 3 as Miyazaki made sure only a certain amount of information is given throughout the presentation. I quote, "Areas are interconnected, just like the first Dark Souls." Of course, this is to be expected from Miyazaki. Now here's when I started getting kind of mixed messages of whether it's more related to Dark Souls 1 or Dark Souls 2. But I believe it's a mix of both. More of Dark Souls 1 in there, in terms of mechanics and just gameplay in general. In the trailer we spot a scene of a graveyard. Then we see a giant lord rising out of a tomb. What mixes me up here is that the giant's form is that of the giants in Dark Souls 2, which begs the question of how Miyazaki is going to put these two games together. Noting that Miyazaki did mention that Dark Souls 3 shares the same world of Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 2. But I'll leave that aside for now. Note that Miyazaki referred to this giant as a Lord of Cinder. According to an interview by Dave Control Live, which I recommend checking out the interview itself, which will be linked in the description. According to an interview by Dave Control Live with Miyazaki, Miyazaki said that the term Lords of Cinder is being used now, and that they're not specifically talking about a particular Lord of Cinder in the past. It's about the lords that keep succeeding the Age of Fire from generation to generation. Well, now that is something that Dave Control Live will have to get props for. This is a pretty big piece of information we've got from Miyazaki himself. So now that we know that the Age of Fire and the will of Gwyn persisted throughout the ages, carried on by different lords who wished for the Age of Fire to continue, which means that it's not the normal course of nature. They're resisting the Age of Dark, which only makes me wonder about the kinds of horror generated by suppressing the Age of Dark over and over again. And another scene in the trailer where we witness a few witches of Hamwick lookalikes march through what looks like the kiln of the first flame from Dark Souls 1, given that ash surrounds the area they were walking in. But it may not necessarily be the first kiln itself. The kiln may have expanded over the course of lords sacrificing themselves to keep the Age of Fire going. So I'm speculating that we might have a level where ash is just all over the place. But I'm only speculating at this point. Now let's briefly talk a little about gameplay mechanics and whatever information we got from the closed conference in E3. Special stances. You know, ever since I saw that leaked screenshots where the player was holding the other sword on his back instead of just in his pocket, I knew that this had to do with combat, using the sword on your back more than the sword just being there aesthetically. This is where we mention stances. Stances allow players to utilize devastating abilities like a powerful slash or an uppercut which sends foes flying. This particular stance is mentioned as the ready stance. Now I'm not sure about the name of the second stance because the first stance's name used to be something else which I can't remember for some reason right now, but it used to be called something else. Now, talking about the second stance, which may be called the circle stance, because the circle stance is basically the name of the evasion stance we got from the leaked information. But according to the very first leak, it's the opposite of the ready stance, which is more about the evasion of attacks, unlike the ready stance, which might put you in the risk of taking hits, but also delivering devastating blows at the same time. A high risk, high reward sort of situation, unless it is executed in a way where the risk is lessened by a lot due to knowing what to use the attack. According to an interview by GameSpot recently, two-handing your right weapon, short swords for example, you're able to go into the ready stance, and with great swords you'll be able to engage in more devastating attacks. This simply tells me that these stances are based on the type of weapons you're holding. Which reminds me of the variety of the dual wield stances in Dark Souls 2, except that we now have a different mechanic other than dual wielding to match all these different weapons. Dual wielding is not confirmed in Dark Souls 3 as far as I know, so don't quote me on that. Now before I wrap up the video, just a few more points that I noted down from all the sources we got from E3. According to Miyazaki, bosses have multiple stages where their movesets change, but the demonstrator did not make it to the second level of the fight during the presentation in E3 apparently. In terms of lore, it will be up to the player's interpretation as usual with the Miyazaki Souls games. And check it out, backstabs are back. That's right, I don't know how a lot of people may feel about this, but I do not mind a bit of backstabs. I really don't mind it. I'm glad they're back. I know it's I know it may have been a little frustrating with Dark Souls 1, but apparently they mentioned something about dedicated servers, which is something I would probably take with a grain of salt, because they did mention dedicated servers for Bloodborne and I mean, I would count on it more for Dark Souls 3 more than any other game, because they did improve the connection in Dark Souls 2 Scholar of the First Sin more than any Souls game out there, including Bloodborne. Bloodborne still has a few issues with connectivity and matchmaking, but hopefully they'll be fixed soon. But back on topic. Backstabs are back. And guess what? No time for torches. That's good. I like that FromSoft is taking basically what I've mentioned before, the best out of every single Souls game, and just implementing it into Dark Souls 3 to make it the final, ultimate Dark Souls experience. People who were there for the presentation have witnessed smooth arching and sword swinging, fluidly expanding the possibilities of combat in both PvE and PvP. Now, this means that sword swinging and bow arching is much more fluid than all the Souls games, than all the Dark Souls games, to be specific. It might have been, it was useful back in Dark Souls 2, sword swinging and arching, but I guess they're implementing it in a way where it's just fluidly blends in with the combat in PvE and PvP, which is something very promising to hear about. And also, quite a few people have been saying that this will be the last Dark Souls game. So they're bringing everything they've got from Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 2 to make the best of the whole series. Don't worry, it may be the last Dark Souls game, but definitely not the last Souls game, or the last Demon Souls, or Bloodborne, for example. I wouldn't be surprised if they announced a new Souls IP after Dark Souls 3, or even a Demon Souls 2 or Bloodborne 2. But we'll talk about that when we get our hands on some actual solid information about that. We're talking at least 2 years from now. So there's also a new feature, which is small gravestones. When standing near one, you can press the action button to quote-unquote offer flame, which illuminates the gravestone in a blue light. After lighting it up, an inscription on the tomb reads, "Grave of nameless retainer, raised his sword for the Lord of Cinder." Very, very interesting lore-wise. According to Miyazaki, this isn't a huge feature of the game, but they're used as landmarks, torches, or simply a way to learn bits of the lore, and so they'll be hidden throughout the world for the player to discover. Now, I know we haven't gotten much more than a mere trailer from E3 and just basically words without footage from the demo, but hopefully we'll get our hands on, well, not our hands on, we'll pretty much get our eyes on some, demo gameplay or just we're basically at the mercy of FromSoft now, just waiting for them at their own pace to release some gameplay for us to enjoy and get hyped about. Anyway, this has been Days. Have a great E3 and have a great day.